All right, we're all set.
Okay. Good evening,
Oh, and here's
everyone.
Freddie.
Oh.
Perfect. Freddie's here now too.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. This is the Board of Education meeting for which adequate notice under the Open Public Meetings Act was provided by written notice on July 9, 2020 to the Courier News, the Echo Sentinel, the Star Ledger, Tappan to Warren, and the clerks of the Borough of Watchung and Township of Greenbrook, Long Hill, and Warren. Roll call, please, Mr. Stiles.
Mr. Chand?
Yeah.
Mr. Fallon?
Yes.
Mr. Hayek?
Yes.
Mr. Hunsinger?
Yes.
Mr. Morrison? I see Bob.
Got to unmute to say yes, Bob.
All right.
Oh, there he is. I see. Mrs. Ober?
Here.
Ms. Potter?
Here.
Dr. Shabilsky?
Here.
Mr. Bond?
Here.
And Ms. Barone.
Here. You can please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay, let me share my screen. And
Okay, I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're getting closer.
Yeah, we don't need to get that right. Hopefully we're. All right, may I have a motion in accordance with the provisions of the New Jersey Open Public Meetings Act? Be it hereby resolved that the board move into executive session to discuss confidential personnel and legal matters and the CSA evaluation governed by attorney-client privilege, after which action may be taken. It is expected that the matters discussed in executive session will be made public as soon as the need for confidentiality no longer exists.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. We'll be back in a half an hour.
okay, we're back in public.
Okay. Moving forward with our agenda. In terms of board correspondence, I don't think we have anything in particular. We got a couple correspondence from parents indicating that they enjoyed the graduation, that they were appreciative of all the effort that went into it. And we did get a board correspondence about the mascot, which is on the agenda for new business at the end of the meeting. So next would be superintendent's comments.
Actually, I believe we have it on for board discussion.
Oh, board discussion, is that where we have it? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's not like anything new is happening, so I don't have much to report. This has probably been, the busiest summer, obviously, since I've been here. And we've had some very busy summers with a lot of projects going on, with a lot of summer programs going on. But obviously, we are trying to plan for reopening. Before I get into that, though, I do want to follow up on the graduation comments. The students were outstanding. The ceremony, I think exceeded our expectations in terms of what we would be able to pull off. And I have to give credit to the students for their decorum and behavior and enthusiasm during the ceremony, and our entire staff, our administration who planned it, our PAC crew who oversaw all of the media for it, our security staff, our buildings and grounds staff. It really was, it was a nice event. And, I'm sorry that people weren't able to join us live, in person, but at least they were able to view it live. And it really was a really nice culmination to their senior year. With regard to reopening, we have been working on that diligently and nonstop with meetings every day about different aspects of it. So, and the reason I haven't shared more about the plan is because it is constantly evolving. And so we're being very careful of what we're putting out there, because we don't want to put information out there that is then going to change based on, the other logistics that we have to account for. It is, I can say that it is, almost definitely going to be a hybrid model, because I don't see any other way for us to have all students in the school every day. We have almost 2,000 students, about 1,900 students, plus we have over 200 staff members. So having that many people in the building, given the guidelines and restrictions, is not only not really in following the guidelines and restrictions, but based on our conversations with our local health official, with medical professionals, we don't feel that that's the best decision for the health and safety of the students. So we are looking at a hybrid model. We have been talking to our K-8 districts to try and coordinate those as much as possible, because we know that parents have students at various grade levels. And I think one of the other biggest hurdles we're facing is lunch. As silly as that may sound, to build a schedule around lunch, in this case, that is the most problematic. And so while we, certainly are aiming and have been aiming to try and do full days, we're realizing that that may not be feasible, given that, we would have to provide lunch for, about 1,000 students. And we're just not sure if we can find a way to do that that's in line with the guidelines and, what we feel is safe for everyone in the building. So, those are just some of the conversations we're having. Obviously, we're talking about everything from transportation to direction in our hallways, to, sanitizing stations, to our classes, that are more hands-on, that involve students handling different materials, to our choir and band and instrumental music classes, which obviously have additional concerns. So these are all of the various aspects we're looking at, and we have a lot of staff members as well as community members helping us in this. And, I certainly, as I get more information, I will share that with you. And that will also be some additional details will be shared during the committee reports tonight. But I can just, I can say that this is certainly, I honestly don't know of a bigger challenge that I faced as an educator in my career. And I think a lot of people feel the same way. I do feel very fortunate, as I did when we closed in the spring, that our staff and our community is very committed to doing what's best for the students and to figuring out a solution collaboratively. So I'm very, very appreciative of our entire staff. And we have a number of teachers who have been actively involved in the committees over the summer, even though they're on their summer break, which, we certainly appreciate, because we need their input and their voice. So stay tuned, and I will share more details with you as we have them.
Okay. I don't have any comments tonight. Tim, do you have any comments? Maybe, do you have any updates on the media center or?
No real update on the media center. It's still, the work's ongoing. The frame is starting to take place or take shape. So it's starting to, you kind of get a good view of what it looks like right now, or what it's going to look like, at least the frame of the outside of it. But they're working pretty diligently. I saw them today. Also, the tennis courts are completely done. There's just a few minor punch list items that need to get done, but that's it. By and large, they're pretty much done. The security walls are, I know the guys were working today. They still have to put up the bulk of the walls yet, and the sign out front too, but that's the update on that. One thing I did want to mention to the board and actually to the public is that the deadline, the filing deadline for board members, just a reminder, I believe it's July 27th. So if your term is up this December, just make sure that you, if you choose to file, just make sure you remember the deadline is July 27th, but you want to try to get it a little bit ahead if you could. I never like to take chances.
Tim, do you know of any type of changes in the way we're submitting? People are supposed to submit that. I mean, they still have to get the 10 signatures, right? And one can be your signature, but you just go down and drop it off at the municipal building. I mean, at the county courthouse.
they can be submitted by email to the county clerk.
Okay.
Yeah, they updated things because of current
COVID.
conditions.
Right.
Okay. So basically you just scan it and,
Right, but it's always good to check with the county clerk, either they're Morris or Somerset.
who's up? Who's up?
So
Peter.
Jordana would be
Peter.
Peter and Freddie.
Okay. Well, I hope you all re-up.
I think there's
Like I
only
said,
one
just
way
a
Peter's
reminder.
leaving.
I want another certificate, Bob, in a nice frame.
Thank you, Tim, for that. That was a good reminder.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Committee reports. First one we have is education.
So the Education Committee met on July 9th last week. We had a full house, including all of our board members, Jordana, Freddie, Janine, Rita. We had the superintendent, Ms. Schneiderman, Ms. Phelan, Mr. Rivera, Ms. Drummer, and Jason Sabino. The bulk of our discussion centered around as the superintendent alluded to, the idea around the hybrid instructional model. Mr. Librera, walked the committee through the thinking, regarding the reopening of schools in the fall and trying to come up with the plan on how instruction will be delivered to the students when they return. They've talked about the transitioning from the distance learning to what's described as this hybrid model that Dr. Jewett mentioned. And they're still working on these plans, again, because of there's so many different moving parts that have to be considered, bringing forward both to the committee and then the board more details when everything has been worked out. One of the things that they're looking at is moving away from Zoom to Google Meet. And part of the reason for looking at the Google Meet is the idea that there can be synchronous learning through Google Meet because they've upgraded many of their features. So what that would mean is if we are in a hybrid model and you've got a group in class, B group can actually be participating in the same class remotely. So in that environment, there actually are some benefits for utilizing the synchronous model. For some of our classes, wouldn't necessarily work for everything, but I think the idea of having that technology available and having students not really miss a beat just because they're not in the building, I think has some great advantages. But as Dr. Jewett said, there's a lot of other things they've got to work through, whether it's lunch, whether still the transportation issues and others, to come up with a really solid plan. And so obviously they need more time to work on that. And we figure we're going to be meeting multiple times in the coming weeks as we try to solidify something that will be brought to the board. Also has to go to the county for approval. Mr. Sabino gave us an update on scheduling, and I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to spend much time with Mr. Sabino, but in the time that we've had to spend with him in the education committee, very impressive guy. A real breath of fresh air coming into the whole area of guidance and scheduling. He gave us an update on scheduling. He said 93% of students received their first choice requests. And obviously there are some things that are very popular, like culinary arts remains very popular with our students. But we did have a nice discussion around scheduling and how that may be impacted with seats and students being available maybe to have more seats in certain courses or not, based on the hybrid instructional model. And he's going to be doing some additional look into that. Additionally, Mr. Librera shared with us some of the feedback that the district received regarding distance learning in the spring. And the administration was looking at ways to improve the experience and improve the teacher's ability to enhance their own learning through professional development. So as we move into some sort of model where there's going to be a combination of in-person and remote learning, clearly providing appropriate professional development for our staff is going to be a key to that. We talked a little bit more, again, not only about the hybrid model, but also some conversations around the guidance coming from everybody and their brother, including the CDC, the state, and the Department of Education. And again, these are all part of this three-dimensional chess game that the administration has to go through in trying to figure out how do we open our schools safely? How do we provide continuity of instruction for our students? So that was our discussion in Education Committee. I'll open it up to any of the committee members if they want to add anything to that before we go to questions. Anything from other committee members? Seeing none, I see Mr. Fallon's got his hand up.
Bob, I was curious about the discussion about seats and scheduling, and specifically the question, if you were told anything regarding, is this limiting, is the distancing requirements in the classroom that in operations we spoke about with Chris Bick having any impact on how many slots are available in the various electives?
Yeah, well, I mean, what brought it up was, what brought the discussion up was my inability to do math. And so what I mean by that is, we were talking about culinary arts because culinary arts is such a really popular program. And we're sitting there going, wow, well now if there's a way that, because half the students are in and half the students are out, maybe we can, crank more students through that program. And of course, I forgot everything about social distancing that you have to take into account, which limits the amount of students that are in that class and therefore limits our ability to do some of that. So, that was the model that I began looking at because that is such a high demand class and maybe there's a way for us to cycle more kids through that. The reality is that didn't work, but that's not necessarily to say that there may not be instances where that may work. But again, that was just, we're at the beginning of those conversations as he looks through it. And again, at the end of the day, social distancing math kind of makes that difficult, even though theoretically we would think that it would make sense.
Well,
Yeah, and my question was, I guess, a little bit different. I was wondering when Mr. Sabatino tells you that 93% of the kids got their first choice, was that done with a model where we've reduced the number of available slots in the electives due to the distancing requirements in the classroom?
So Peter, I can address what our approach has been to scheduling thus far. So what we decided to do, because the scheduling starts in the spring, before we had any idea, I think we started scheduling before we even knew if we'd be closed the rest of the year. We didn't know what would happen for the fall. So we built the schedule as we normally would. And with the caveat, luckily Genesis has a lot of nice features, knowing that we could build a parallel schedule if we needed to with different restrictions. But what we're looking at doing right now, because Genesis, I believe, actually added some additional features in the past month, knowing that schools would be, needing to do some creative scheduling for the fall. So one of our next steps, because looking at a hybrid, most likely we try and divide it alphabetically. And, assuming that our K-8s may be doing something similar, they would do the same. And we would try and, obviously it's not going to be a perfect split across grade levels, but we'll match it up so that families, who have multiple students would be coming to school on the same days. However, splitting the students in half doesn't mean that the classes will automatically go to half capacity. So what I do believe that Mr. Savino said, through Genesis, we have the ability to now run an alphabetical split of all the sections to see what those numbers work out like. So that way we can see how unbalanced they are. Now, there could be classes that have 75% of the students still in them and other classes that end up with 30% on certain days. So what we need to do is take a look at that, take a look at those classrooms. We have laid out the classrooms, to see in terms of what we can fit in there with desks with social distancing. And our health officials for the county, there are multiple health officials in the county. They each oversee a number of districts within our county. They all are in agreement with the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendation that says that with masks, 3 feet of social distancing is adequate for classrooms. So that's what most of us are working with. And so that certainly gives us some more leeway with the number of students in the classroom. But that's our next step, is to take a look at that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to add real quick, I should have added before, is just so everybody knows, at each of these meetings, I attended them all, policy issues were coming up. So we are going to have to deal with changes in our policy. The one thing that came up from in education was the home instruction policy, I think, was one of the issues that came up. So, but that's just one of many. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there.
There's going to be a boatload of policies that we're going to have to revise based on all.
And
this
that we will be doing that through the committee
Committees.
structure.
Dr. Schabelsky?
A couple of points. One, you've probably heard in the news that the Secretary of Education has been all gung-ho about kids returning to school and that there is no risk for kids. I would be careful to read between the lines. And if you look at the data that exists both in the US and internationally, the risk is probably very low for the K through 5 population. And as you get older, the risk gets more. And the risk is not just to the individual kids, which is what I think Ms. DeVos is describing, but it is the risk of what that child takes to somebody else, whether it be teachers, staff, grandparents at home, what have you. So I think it is still a serious issue. I am supportive of the hybrid model because I think that's the only way that this is going to work. And I do think that we as a board need to send a clear message that masks are not an optional thing, that they are going to be mandatory, and we will need to have some process in place to manage when that's not handled. And mandatory masks does not mean that the nose is uncovered, that the mask is on your forehead and not over your mouth. It means that it is over your nose and mouth, because it does make a difference, and the science supports it. Regardless of what you see on TV happening on Florida beaches and in Florida bars, you can infer the data from what you're seeing as to what the consequences are when you don't pay attention to the science.
Which means also look at what's happening now in Florida hospitals as a result of that.
Right.
And just one of the things that came up, and I'm sure that Dr. Jewett wants to respond to that as well. One of the things that our meeting took place on the day where everyone was yelling to send the kids back into schools, and all of a sudden the CDC guidance was now becoming an opinion column as opposed to a scientific research group. So one of the things that I feel very strongly about personally, and I've shared this with the committee members because I spend, I'm certainly not don't pretend to be an expert, and certainly not, have the background, Greg, that you have on this, but I spend probably 7 hours a day dealing with this stuff as it relates to my own business. And the science is compelling, and we have to listen to the science, and we've got to make decisions that are based on the best available science at the time. And yes, science changes because that's science. But we got to make decisions based on the best available information, because at the end of the day, the president has kicked it to the governors, the governor has kicked it to the Department of Education, the Department of Education has kicked it to us. And this is now our call. And it's certainly not a decision that we can take lightly by any stretch of the imagination. So I'll stop with that.
One other thing is, just so everybody's clear, that the director of special education was also part of the education committee, because there are different considerations for special education kids, and it might not be a hybrid model for all of them, correct?
Correct.
Because the guidance also indicates that those who are at risk most in terms of having a distance learning model, and if there's less kids in that classroom. So
Correct.
There's going to be a survey specifically, I think, right? Am I correct?
No, I mean not necessarily a survey. I think we're
okay.
just in our plan. We're looking at the students.
Specific.
Yes. Yep. To having it, a little bit different for them.
Yeah.
Any other questions on the committee report? All right.
Okay, personnel. Obviously, we discussed it. We discussed the agenda items in exec, but we also had a personnel committee meeting regarding reopening as well. So I don't know if we want to, how much, information, but there's obviously also personnel concerns that we have to deal with through the reopening process that are getting, that are being vetted through the various committees, administrative committees, and then the board committee. So, and then operations. Oh.
Unmute, Peter.
Thank you, guys.
Rita,
I'll try
just a
again.
second.
Yeah.
We met,
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
About,
I think Susan wanted to add something about personnel
Just-
committee.
oh, I'm
we
sorry, go
talked
ahead.
about, a faculty survey that was going out, but I don't know, did that go out? And do we have the results back from that?
That is out now. It went out Friday and it will close this Friday. So we're still
Okay.
gathering data.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. Okay.
Okay. The Operations Committee met on July 9th, and Tim arranged for Jim Finn, our district healthcare broker with Brown & Brown, and a couple other people from his office to come in and talk to us about Senate Bill 2273, which was passed by both the Senate and the Assembly and signed by Governor Murphy. This is going to have an impact on our budget. In essence, the new law mandates that districts, in addition to the plans that we currently offer, offer a plan called the New Jersey Educators Health Plan, where the contributions that the staff members are going to make is going to be based upon their salary and not on the plan premium. The financial impact that this would have on both the employers and the district was described. The employee will most likely see an increase in their net salary, while the district could see a substantial reduction in the amount of contributions. That's because presently, with many of our employees, we get in the neighborhood of 22 to 24% of the premium from their contributions. That's as a result of the law that was passed several years ago, Chapter 78. But under this plan that Sweeney has come up with, when it is limited to a percentage of their salary, it's going to be down closer to 10% of that we'll be getting, rather than the 22 to 24%. And and one thing about this new plan that has to be offered under the law, even though we have set different plans negotiated with our association that we offer, we currently offer 2 plans. Despite that, and that's contractually mandated, despite that, this law says we don't have any choice. We have to offer this New Jersey Educators Health Plan. And one of the things in that is every new employee hired after July 1 of 2020 is going to have to be on that plan, and they cannot opt into one of the existing plans that we have. During open enrollment, all employees are going to be automatically enrolled in this Educators Health Plan, and it's going to be up to the individual employees to opt out of that and to opt back into their existing health plans that they have now. So this is designed to get as many bodies as possible into this Educators Health Plan. And there's another aspect to this, which is, as I said, basically it's going to reduce the contribution that we as a board are going to see from employees from about 22 to 24% of the health insurance premium to something closer to 10%. that means that we're going to have to make up the difference in what the health insurance is going to cost. Now, if a certain number of people go into this new health plan and very few people stay in the other, then Tim, maybe you can address exactly how that balance works. But there is a possibility that we could break even with this, but the more realistic expectation is that it's going to be costing us more premium dollars in the future.
Yeah, so if there's the Teachers Association and the governor's office, or actually Sweeney's office, have been talking about the bill in terms of the savings for taxpayers, which may or may not be the case. It depends. It depends on how many people go in it, at what rate they are, where their salaries are. So there's a whole, it's kind of complicated, and it's not as simple as just shifting one to the other. There is a open enrollment in January. That's when the bill essentially takes effect. So the impact will only be half a year for us this year, and we don't know who's going to go in and who's not, other than the new employees that we know, and also the retirees, which we don't pay for. But the retirees are also automatically in this new plan. The thing that Peter's talking about is, if you're a district that is over adequacy, when we do our budget, there's this adequacy formula. And we are over adequacy. We're a high impact school district, a district that has, or a high achieving district, I'm sorry, that really, those type of districts are generally over adequacy. It's very rare if they're not. So we're over adequacy. So if you're over adequacy, any savings made by staff taking this, if there are any savings at all, it would have to go back to taxpayers. If you're under adequacy, you can actually keep that in your budget for other items. So that's kind of how that works. There's also a provision in there that if we lose money, we can open up negotiations with the association. But it wasn't very clear in the bill how that actually comes to pass.
Yeah, and because these new plans, the way they get to be much cheaper than the existing plans, is they're much more limited in their coverage of out-of-network benefits.
Higher deductible plans with,
yes,
correct.
And so
they were going to do a whole bunch of education for the employee.
Yeah, Brown is going to come in and put on presentations for all our employees, so that, because we want them to understand, if you're someone who uses some doctors out of network, or if besides just the out of network, there's another difference based upon the plan is instead of paying the prevailing reimbursement amounts in this area, is going to be paying a rate that's closer to a Medicaid rate, which for some procedures is much less. And so if you're someone who does that, who's used those sort of benefits in the last few years, it's possible that by going to this employer's plan, the educator's health plan, that you'd actually have a higher out-of-pocket at the end of the day. That's the sort of education that Brown & Brown wants to come in and do for our employees before they make their choices to which to switch. But the real issue for us as a board, as I saw it, is, there's no upside for this for the board. They all choose cheaper plans. It saves them money. To the extent it saves us money, we have to give it back to the taxpayers. To the extent it costs us money, we have to pay it. So, it's a heads you win, tails we lose.
The timing on this is?
January, as Tim said, will be the open enrollment. So it'll affect the half year in this current school year.
Okay. So sometime in the fall, Brown & Brown would come in and do the education?
Yes.
Or December or something?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and then with the rest of it was reopening, right? Basically.
Yeah, the rest of it was a long discussion about reopening where, you know, all of us were adding our ideas, making sure that, that the administration is trying to address as many things as they can, and get us as ready as we can. You know, the scary part of this is that there are just so many different contingencies, and we could, you know, go to some great hybrid model and be moving along great for a couple of weeks, and then somebody comes into the school and gets sick, and, you know, we're going to have a contingency of do we close down then, for how long, and, you know, what do we do with someone when they're sick and in the building, you know, safe spaces, all that stuff. There's so many things that the administration has to get through, as Bob alluded to before. It's just, you know, we're going to be changing this constantly, and you know, the administration's already doing a really good job in you know, coming up with lists and things that they've got to cover, but it's a huge undertaking. And that was it for the, and we had the construction update that Tim gave us earlier tonight, and that was it for operations.
Peter, you just reminded me of something that I did want to share tonight. In coming up with our draft schedule, you know, I'd mentioned before that lunch is certainly a concern, and in looking at the schedule. So it's very possible, as multiple people have mentioned, you know, this is continuously evolving, and I'm sure it will also do so once school has started. So likely whatever initial schedule we come up with, we will roll that out as our plan for September. With the, you know, with the knowledge that if we find that it's going well, and let's say we start with half days with no lunch, and we find out that we're able to incorporate lunch after school has, you know, been in session for a couple of weeks, we may revise the schedule. But that is really likely going to be our approach, so that people know that it's not set in stone, and that we will, you know, we'll start off with what we think is safest and what we can manage. And if it turns out we can enhance what we're doing, then we will certainly do that.
Other questions?
Bob has his hand raised.
Yes, I was curious, Mr. Fallon or Mr. Stiles, regarding issues of the HVAC system and filtration and the work that's going into that area, because it seems that has an impact on a lot of things, the ability to use space. So could you just speak briefly to that?
Chris Bick did speak with us about, you know, we've got different systems in the two buildings. The south building is primarily univents, and they're in one part of the classroom, and there's a air exchanger at the bottom and the top. One of it's, the air comes into the room, the other it goes out. Those can be adjusted to open the dampers to the outside to a greater extent. That would, you know, accomplish the CDC, you know, recommended goal of mixing more fresh air in there at some cost to efficiency and fuel costs. Tim, did he say that putting HEPA filters on those things would be a cost prohibitive retrofit?
Yeah, I don't know if we got into that detail. I can tell you that it's expensive. We have an awful lot of filters. So yeah, I haven't gotten into I've seen discussions in the last couple of days about the HEPA filters, and Chris and Michael Pisani are on our operations team that we meet now twice a week. So that topic is, Chris had a couple of well-deserved days off, so I'm going to touch on that one either later in the week or on Monday or Tuesday. But yeah, I mean, the HEPA filter is a little tough, and the ventilation, just to add to that, one thing that back in 2013, if the board remembers, we had fans on our rooftops which were inoperable, and the board made the decision to add in the referendum at the time to connect all of the fans to make them all operational throughout the building, which greatly increases the airflow, and we can control it, which is a nice function. So,
right.
So just
I sent over a couple
not
of
that
things.
we saw this was coming, but we, you know, it certainly helps.
I think at some point in time, there's going to be a discussion in operations about the costs of increasing the fresh air circulation in the building versus and the health issue versus the cost issue. Do we spend more money on ventilation, less money somewhere else? What is the priority in terms of the ventilation? Because changing the ventilation system in any way is going to cost money. So we have to figure out a cost benefit analysis. The research is suggesting that there is a huge benefit to that. The question is, can we afford it?
Well, I
Dr.
guess
Shabilsky also brought to our attention a study that's been done in you know, some restaurant, which, you know, where exactly in a room the air is flowing has a very great impact on who is going to get sick. And so it's not just a question of the amount of air, it is also a question of the direction of flows and who is downwind from someone who might get sick. So yes, it is going to be discussed in Tim's operations meetings with Mike and with Chris, but there's going to be a whole lot more to come, and it is unfortunately not a simple answer to just creating more ventilation. All this stuff has to get taken into account.
Right.
well, and it's not just the more ventilation, it's also just understanding what's the air change rate in the room. You know, how
Right.
frequently
Right.
does the air
Right.
change over?
Right. Right.
And having that understanding, you know, what's our baseline to begin with, will then help direct us as, you know, to what degree do we need to invest more or less to improve that, or we may find out that we're okay. You know?
Yeah, Bob's correct. I mean, the issue really is, in reading it and talking to my husband who's in public health, it's that restaurant study is because it was recirculated air, right? So if you're bringing the air out and you keep bringing new air in and keep bringing new air in, and that exchange and the amount of new air coming in is at a certain rate, somehow that is what reduces the amount of exposure. So it's like an engineering. We may have to get our HVAC engineering people involved. So.
Yeah, I think Chris has a really good beat on that, and he knows what comes in and what goes. So I mean, that really, the way we do it, it is all outside air, and it's flowing constantly like that. The one downside I'll tell you, especially in the winter months, when you have that outside air coming in at a higher rate, it gets cold.
Yes, right.
So I'm just keeping it real, but I mean, he has a very good understanding of which. And we have different systems. We have steam heat in the south. We have rooftop units in the north. So it's a mix mash of things that happened over the many years. So that's a big discussion item.
There's a couple of hands raised. Reed, I'm not sure if you can see them.
I just see Mr.
So it's
Naresh's hand because I can see his hand.
Yeah, Dr. Shabil. It should be Dr. Shabilsky, then Mr. Hayek, then Dr. Chand.
Okay.
Thanks. I want to emphasize that from a cost perspective, and so that the community understands, our goal is to create the safest environment possible. Ultimately, we'll figure out how we're going to accomplish that financially, but I don't want the impression that it's going to be a balanced trade-off of expense versus safety. Safety is number one priority, and then we'll figure out how to deal with the expense.
Yes.
Yeah, I just had a question if the operations committee has any direction with the cleaning and sanitation protocol, if it's the school district's gonna be using foggers or UV lights.
And Chris has already been looking into those things and various technologies, and we also got some input from Barry. These are all things that are being looked at as to what exactly is going to be done in the end. We all know that our cleaning budget is probably going to go up fourfold, if not more. But as Dr. Shabilsky said, we're going to do what's necessary to keep the students and the staff safe. But the exact features of it yet, all I can tell you is, Freddie, is all those things, the ultraviolet, the foggers, all those are being looked at.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the board, but just as a clarification, the board did already approve certain items. Like we did approve the foggers.
Yes.
The board approved changing all of the bathroom, the towel dispensers, the soap dispensers, the flushing mechanisms, all to hands-free, just to eliminate the touching as much as possible. So, I mean, we've put in orders for other things, you know, your cloths, your wipes, those kind of things. The one thing I'll tell you is that a lot of these things are on back order. It is a struggle throughout the entire state. So that, again, we make our phone calls every other day, and that is a concern. There's no question about it. Some of the things have come in, like the plumbing stuff and those kind of things, which we can do and have our guys do. That stuff has come in, and some of our PPE and those kind of things that we've ordered have come in. But some of that other stuff, the heavy duty cleaning stuff, that is where we're running into a little bit of a difficulty with back orders.
Dr. Chand?
Yeah, so I am the user actually with HEPA filters. I used them for 12 years in Bell Laboratories. So just wanted to share some experience with you. If you want to use HEPA filter, you have to use 2 sets of filters. HEPA filter, before that you have to use pre-filter. So a HEPA filter cannot interface the air from the, before that you have to have another pre-filter. Otherwise the HEPA filter will be clogged up very soon. And they are indeed very, very expensive. And the pre-filter had to be replaced periodically, because if you don't replace them, then the efficiency of HEPA filter will go down. So just wanted to tell you that this is my own experience. I used to change pre-filter every 3 months, and every year I had to change the HEPA filter. I needed to use class 100 environment. So just wanted to share this information with you.
Thank you, Naresh. And I'm sure Tim will share that with Chris, who may already be aware of it, but it's helpful information. Thank you.
Thanks.
And Mr. Morrison?
By the way, it might be more worthwhile to put bring the air freshener. You know, there are some machines today like fan, right? So in the room, if you put air freshener, probably that would also fresh the air, right? Localized if you use that.
Bob?
So just a quick question, Tim, regarding PPE. I think there seems to be some concern amongst other board members that I talked to from across the state regarding the ability to acquire, PPE consistently and in quantities that we're going to need. And I know this all depends on what we decide to do with it, but are you experiencing that, or do you think that, are we okay, or, or is there a cooperative that we can buy with, or what?
We have a couple of, I see Dr. Shabilsky talking, and I don't know if he's oh, okay. Cut you off. Sorry about that. So we haven't, so far we already purchased some not reusable, but the disposable masks, which we have on hand. We didn't have too much trouble getting those. We're looking to get the reusable ones, and we also got some shields for the child study team, which we would like to purchase more. And I haven't heard any issues in terms of getting that. So that stuff right now, I knock on wood, I feel confident with. It seems like masks about like 2 or 3 months ago were like, you couldn't find one anywhere, but it does seem like more and more you see they're much more available right now.
And we also have the student who's making the masks for us, right?
We do. We have a student who's asked to make masks and shields
yes,
through
a variety
Eagle Scout project, which is great.
Anybody else?
Okay. Seeing now, I'm going to move over to our first opportunity for public comment. The first public comment period will be limited to agenda items for this meeting only. The second public comment period will be open to any topic. All comments are limited to 5 minutes. If you have a comment, please use your raise the hand function.
For those of you who may have not be familiar with Zoom, if you go, you need to click on participants so that the participant panel is showing. And then at the bottom of that, you'll see a raise your hand function. Sometimes it's a little different on different computers, but that's generally how it works. And as I have said in the past, if for some reason you can't find it and want to make a public comment, we have a second opportunity at the end of the meeting. If you email me between now and then, I will make sure to call on you if you are unable to raise your hand.
And just as usual, if you want to make a comment, please state your name and the town you're from.
I'm just going to check my email. I do not see any hands raised at this time.
Okay. All right, I'm going to close the first opportunity for public comment. There's a second opportunity at the end of the meeting, as I indicated, and we're going to move into board discussion. And I'm going to, Greg, I'm going to let you start on the board discussion.
I wonder if he,
No, he doesn't want to start. I can't hear him.
he may be having an issue with start.
Okay.
He can't unmute. Oh, you know
You're
what?
reading his lips?
Yes. You know what? Greg,
There
try
you
now.
go.
I just realized one of the.
Thanks for putting me in the penalty box.
I'm so sorry. I was fixing security for the participants, and I'm glad I could leave.
If you really don't want me to talk, just let me know.
I'm just glad you were able to enunciate well enough that I could figure out.
Thanks for being able to lip read. So obviously there have been a number of events throughout the country that have, I think, refocused attention on racism and discrimination. And this is an issue that we've tackled in various circumstances within my tenure at the board with, I think, some attention to it, but not resolution to it. And some of you who have been here for a few years probably remember that there had been a student petition to address one of the, I think, more evident areas of what is considered racist, and it is the school mascot and the school symbol. And given the climate that we are in, I thought that it was important, and we did discuss this at the last meeting, that we should bring it up under board discussion as to how to address it. So hopefully you received and have had the opportunity to read a proposed resolution. The purpose of that was, rather than to have a free-for-all discussion, actually have a matter to look at and to debate and hopefully move forward in a timely way, whether that's at the next board meeting or, depending on this discussion, whether it's something that everyone feels is more pressing. But fundamentally, the resolutions action items in the resolves are charging our superintendent to create a committee of at least one volunteer, if not more, from various different stakeholders to not just examine this issue, but to make recommendations back to the board about, and it's not just the school name and symbol, but the logo is used in a variety of different areas, and sort of giving a wholesale look at how the school is misappropriating, in the view of many, including me, a cultural identity that we should not be. Another resolve is to look at our curriculum currently, so that for the 2022 school year, that we can get some recommendations on whether our curriculum is adequately addressing this and what recommendations there might be for expanding it. And then I think included in one of those two resolves is some sort of acknowledgement, and this is in the first resolve, an acknowledgement that can be a plaque or various other ways to recognize the school culture, history, as well as the community history that we stand on the shoulders of. So I'll stop there and see what everyone else has to say.
I read Greg's resolution. I supported it. I emailed him that I did have two questions. One, which I'll just throw out just to the rest of the board members as well, was wondering whether there should be one board member also on the committee that would be formed pursuant to this resolution. And, you know, as I say, I'll, you know, just raise that as a point of discussion with the rest of the board. The other was just one of the things mentioned in it was that a representative of the Lenape Nation had come forward with something, and I just, since I didn't know who it was and I didn't know whether they were a member as opposed to a representative, I just wanted there to be some clarity on that. And if representative is the correct term for whoever it is we heard from, that's fine.
So Peter, to the first point, the list was not meant to be limiting, but rather a suggestion of, at a minimum, those representatives. I thought since the board was ultimately going to look at this, we didn't necessarily have to be there at the beginning, but absolutely no opposition to that being there. In terms of having somebody from the Lenape Nation involved, I definitely would recommend the invitation, but you have to be expectant that the invitation will be declined. And there's been past experience where it is felt, I think perhaps, and I don't want to speak for any individual, that it's an unsafe environment or that it is not their responsibility to address this issue, but certainly reaching out to ask and offering the opportunity is important.
Yeah, and Greg, I certainly agree with that. My question was addressed more to the whereas clause, where we had indicated that a representative of the Lenape Nation had contacted us about our use of these symbols.
Gotcha. So, and perhaps in second opportunity for public commentary, one of the public, who happens to be my daughter, can address that issue for you. Okay. But essentially, she had been instrumental in the petition that was sent out about 3 years ago and had reached out to a member of the Lenape Nation. And I'm summarizing the response, but she can probably give you a more detailed response.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I just was, in terms of parsing this out, I'm totally believe that a committee should be formed to review the mascot, the name, and, you know, so that we get a recommendation from that committee through the administration, through the superintendent, so that the board can make a decision on that. The curriculum piece, however, I feel like that is being wrapped up in our strategic plan, because it was one of the, it was one if not many boxes, not many, but there was, I think there was multiple boxes about in terms of curriculum and how that would be addressed, or access to curriculum or equities in curriculum. So I just don't know if that is something that we should now have this committee looking at when it's going to be part of the strategic plan.
So I can just give a little bit of detail on that, because we've been working on, we've been utilizing a Squared Consulting. They were the ones who facilitated the June 17th engaging in conversations around race. They helped us with the fall event, the Warriors United Against Hate, and they've also been doing professional development for our staff and working with our students to a certain extent. So we are looking to expand our work with them. And one of those pieces, as per the strategic plan discussions we've had, is incorporating DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, into the curriculum. So I feel like this actually fits into that piece. Because one of the first pieces we're talking about is race. And so this is all kind of a tentative plan that we've come up with because it will require a contract and board approval, but this would actually fit very nicely into the work that we're looking to do, specifically around, there's going to be other components to it, but the first one we're looking at is race, and we're actually looking at 4 domains: identity, diversity, justice, and action. And so this could certainly fit into that. So that way it's not something additional, but a part of that, which I think makes it a little bit more doable with, some of the other pieces that we're looking at. So that's just some information and a suggestion that we actually could put that into that piece. I do believe and while I certainly think that that's something we need to address in a timely manner, I think the mascot itself, the logos, is something that needs to be addressed in the more immediate future, where we can have time to work on the curriculum. I think the mascot decision is something that we should look at, sooner than later. And, I know I had mentioned that perhaps we may even want to, if the board, feels this way, to say we're going to suspend using the logo, the warrior head logo, until we conduct this research and come up with a recommendation, just because as the school year's starting and uniforms get ordered, and we have it in our branding guidelines, so booster clubs may be purchasing things, doing that. So that way it gives us time to look at it before we purchase anything else with that symbol on it. So anyway, I know there's
So in that respect, just so we're clear, like that would be a recommendation from you that we would have to approve, or is that something?
It's not, there's no policy around the mascot there. However, I think if we need to make it clear to the public and the community, what our stance is on this, I certainly think the board making a statement about it or passing a resolution about it makes that clear, because right now it's in our branding guidelines that are on our website. That's up to the board to discuss, but I certainly think because it's the overarching mascot for the school that, that certainly, I think it would be appropriate for the board to take action on that, as many of these other schools listed in this resolution have.
So that would be like an addition to this resolution, be it further resolved that pending the.
Yes, something along those lines. Those are my thoughts.
And Rita, to address your concern on the second resolution, it's actually not the committee, if you read it carefully, that's charged. It's actually the curriculum committee, so it's already their responsibility anyway to look at curriculum and make recommendations. So it's just highlighting to them to give special attention to this when they look at the next iteration for the following school year.
All right.
So Rita, we have a couple folks with their hands raised. If you want me to, so sure. we'll go with Mr. Morrison, then Mr. Hunsinger, then Ms. Raban.
I speak in favor of the resolution, but I did have a couple points, and I want to certainly echo what Peter said. I had the same reaction of, thinking that we should see board representation or a board person. Yes, I recognize that this will ultimately come to the board, but I think it's helpful to have somebody from the board involved in issues, such as this. I think this is a very important issue for the school. The one concern that I shared both with Dr. Schabelsky and the superintendent was my concern over the timing. And it's, there's, as we just talked about, the plates of everybody are overflowing at this point in time. And I think that it needs to move, and it needs to move, with a sense of urgency, but trying to put this on top of having this resolve itself by the first board meeting in September, to me seemed like it was a little ambitious. So, you know, I was wondering if maybe that it could be moved a little bit further beyond the opening of school, because we've got our hands full, you know, with opening school. And so that, I mean, that was just my personal reaction to it. And I also had the same reaction to the last further resolve, that really that's an issue that we were addressing inside of the strategic planning process, and have already had several conversations around that. So I wasn't sure whether or not that was actually necessary, since we're already, you know, that ship is already kind of moving out to sea. So those are my concerns.
Mr. Hunsinger?
I withdrew it.
Oh, okay. Ms. Raban?
Yeah, so, I'm certainly in support of the resolution. I don't think you can, have too much discussion about these kind of matters. My question or maybe suggestion, I agree with Mr. Morrison around the timing, and I'm also thinking, just in the spirit of having this integrated conversation, integrated with other strategic planning conversations that we're having. Because the way I look at it, it's a branding, kind of conversation. And as we look at continue the discussions as part of the strategic plan about who we are, what's our vision, our mission, what's the portrait of a graduate, right? All of that, the icon that represents us, really is a depiction of these conversations. So I'm just wondering if there is a way to have that kind of cohesive conversation so everything comes together beautifully.
Yeah, so the only thing that the mascot and branding, I actually see as two different things. I look at the mascot and our name as this competitive idol that we want to sort of put out there as we are fierce. We are, because that's what you look at all those mascots, right? The portrait of a graduate to me is much more broad and rounder and has all these other types of considerations. Now, maybe the competitiveness is part of that, but the mascot itself really is, or the logo is used, we use it, unless we're not going to use it that way anymore, but traditionally you use it as on your uniforms.
Of course.
In your whatever you're not chanting, but whatever you're going to try to portray out there when you're in a competition, mostly sporting competitions, but other competitions, to say we are this fierce, competitive, strong team, then we're going to win. And I think the portrait of the graduate is different than that. But
well, so I would say from a marketing branding perspective, yes, there's elements of the portrait of a graduate that are different, but there is probably going to be that competitive element, right? So I mean, the portrait of a graduate or other branding elements that we're going to want to pull into the strategic plan really describes who we are, right? What represents us? How do we what makes this school body, the students, unique? And your logo should be a representation of at least some component of that. Yeah, so that's, you go out with that to your competitive games, but it should still be, can't be just, or shouldn't be just a completely separate, in an ideal world. I mean, since we are revisiting it now, as opposed to being stuck with something that's been given to us a long time ago, if you're creating it from scratch, it's nice if it's a cohesive element of who you are and what you feel represents you. I mean, this is purely from like a very pure marketing, when you're looking at logos that represent you as a brand and how they do that visually.
So we have Mr. Hunsinger, Ms. Ober, and then Dr. Shabilsky.
Okay. I'm not really tied to the logo, but I am tied to the warrior name. And I don't think we could or should change that, because I don't see how that could be considered offensive to anyone unless it's someone who's not a warrior. And I think it goes to describe the best attitude to wanting to win, whether it's a football game or a math competition or some other aspect. You're a warrior. And I think that it goes back to the beginning, and it was never meant in an offensive way. Now, if you want to get rid of the Indian head logo, you have to discuss that with the rest of the community. But I think the name has to stay. That's just my personal. And can this ever be put out to a vote of the community?
Ms. Ober? You're muted.
Thanks.
There you go.
I do think it's appropriate to figure out how this gets accomplished. Is it something we can approve as a board? But I think it is an important subject, and I do think the name is probably insensitive and changed, and I would be in support of suspending it until we can figure out what is a more appropriate name. But I wouldn't want to have to delay this much longer because we're all busy and there's so many other things going on, because I do think it's a very, very timely and important topic.
Just to clarify what I was suggesting before, we were talking to suspend the use, not of the name Warriors, but of the warrior head logo that goes with it while we have the larger discussion. That's what, because that I think, and Dr. Shabilsky, you can clarify. I know obviously we wanted to look at the name as well, but I think what has mostly come up in terms of being the most controversial and the most time sensitive is the actual mascot logo. That's, kind of what we want to address sooner than later. And then we can look at the warrior piece as well.
So, Dr. Jewett, I do agree with that comment. I think that the warrior portion of the discussion is much more complicated and probably will have substantially different feelings.
Yes.
If you do look at the social science, they are inseparable in what I have read, but that's going to be up for the group to discuss. And I do share Bob and Jordana's concerns about timing, but to be fair, this is not a new issue. This is an issue that had been raised several years ago, and we can profess that we're trying to speed things up, but the reality is that it's only being sped up because of what is happening across this country right now. And we've had ample opportunity, as you can see in the whereases, where other schools have already made this decision years ago, and we have not. And so, my choice of date was a proposal, not necessarily cut in stone, but it was to impress upon everybody that this is not something that we're just kicking the can down the road for another year or two, but rather that we recognize that it's important and needs to be dealt with.
So we have Mr. Hayek and Mr. Morrison.
I just a question, then kind of follow up with your second question or comment. The idea of suspending the logo, would that be put into the resolution now to be voted on?
If we were going to vote, we haven't actually, nobody's moved it yet, but that could be put into the resolution to vote tonight if we move it to vote tonight.
Okay.
And you'd be able to, just so you know, if that's it, we're not making purchases yet. We're not. So if you waited till the next board meeting to do that, I think that would still be sufficient, just to clarify that.
So I think what we're getting, Freddie, just so it's clear, and I think with Barry's comment is, and Dr. Drew, you're going to have to be clear at the end of this, is if you're recommending us to move forward with it the way, because I think it's an administrative recommendation that we have to consider the way I see the process. I'm sorry, Freddie, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was asking because I don't feel comfortable moving forward to suspend something without buy-in and feedback from the community to make people aware of this. I don't see any harm and anything wrong in reviewing the logo and looking to make positive changes to the community. That was just my one concern I had with that recommendation.
So, and the only thing I'll say to that is then I need to know what to say to our booster clubs, you know, and to our staff, if assuming we're going to have some sort of fall season, you know, purchases are made every year, and you know, things are purchased, things are posted on the media with that warrior head logo. So just understand that if we're not going to do that, then I can't tell them that they can't use it and they can't make purchases with that, because, you know, we have that posted on our website. So that's why I'm asking the board that we need to, it's not that you're permanently eliminating it, it's just pausing new purchases with that while we undertake this review. So just keep that in mind. Mr. Morrison, Mr. Fallon, Ms. Potter, and then Dr. Shabilsky.
I lowered my hand and didn't turn the mic on. So I just, I wanted to get a little bit of clarity because there seems to be some things that are moving around here. You know, the one issue is suspending the use of the icon. The other issue is then, you know, while suspending the use of the icon, still using the warrior name while we're looking at, you know, how do we what do we do about the warrior name, if anything, or do we change the warrior name, which then does slip into branding and some other things, and then the timing along with that, and then community engagement as part of that process. You know, and then the timing, it feels like and I completely agree with what Greg said, is that, yeah, we've had opportunity to do this before, but, you know, this is a little bit of a different set of circumstances that we're in right now. And I think that it needs to be handled with a sense of urgency, but I don't want to have a race to get it done, short circuit the engagement in the process. And so, and I don't know how we balance the two necessarily, but I'm just getting a little confused about the entire relooking at everything versus suspending and how that fits into the resolution. So I would just help me to understand what exactly it is that we're talking about.
So before the other board members speak, I don't know if anyone wanted to respond to that in particular, or.
I mean,
Yes.
the way I heard it, just to clarify the way I'm hearing it, is that there would be a committee to look at the whole picture. While we were looking at the whole picture, we would suspend the use. Suspend means not buy more stuff, not prohibit the use, suspend future purchases that put the logo on it. Now, are you presupposing that the logo's going? I think we are a little bit here. But I think that's sort of, that to me is almost axiomatic of this conversation. I don't think we're going to have a committee that's going to come out and say, that's fine. That's not going to happen. So I don't see anything wrong with it being placed in this resolution. And again, it's suspend, so you're not basically having booster clubs go out and buy all this stuff that's useless in 6 months, more than likely. So I don't know if that provides a little bit more clarity.
And Peter, did you want to respond to that before the other board members speak?
I think two things. One, you know, in terms of, I agree with what Bob and Jordana had said about doing this right. I do agree also that it needs to be alacrity. I would suggest to both Greg and to the rest of the board that we replace by the first meeting in September to as soon as practical, with the understanding and with the administration understanding that we want to hear back on this quickly. Now, it may be that recommendation from the committee may be that we need to get further engagement with the community, and as Freddie had been suggesting, and the recommendation may be that before we do something, we go ahead and somehow engage the community in that. But I think that, you know, we can maintain the idea that this has some degree of urgency in our minds by asking for that report to come to us as soon as practical. And the other thing is I've been noodling around while we've been talking and would propose that if it's okay with Greg, that we could add something like this at the end of it. And be it further resolved that the school district's use of the warrior head icon be suspended pending any action that may be taken by the board upon receipt of the recommendations of the committee referred to above.
Yeah, that makes sense.
One other piece too, in terms of just talking about getting input on this, this is something that the committee is going to, certainly it's going to be a topic of discussion for them, because we have to consider who should be involved in this decision. Should it be primarily our current students? Should it be alumni? Should it be community members? Because people are going to have very different views. And, you know, certainly I think current events have shown that what's considered appropriate now, whether it was appropriate years ago or not, it may have been considered appropriate years ago. And so we're likely to have varying opinions, and it's just something to consider that we may need to weigh those differently. Because if our current students have a very strong feeling, then, you know, we may want to weigh that more than community members and alumni. Just putting that out there, because I'm sure that's going to come up. I know Ms. Potter and Dr. Shabilsky have had their hands raised. So Ms. Potter.
Yeah, I was going to echo something you just kind of referenced, because, you know, is it our position of the board? It's just something that for everybody to think about. Is this just something we think is wrong and we want to eliminate it? If you're opening up to everyone's opinion and everyone thinks, no, it's fine, you know, I don't see a problem with it, where does that leave us? You know, so it's just something to think about. And I think what you said about, you know, how much input and who is something to think about. But I am in total support of it.
Dr. Shabilsky.
So first to Peter's amendments, substantively, I have no objection to them. Again, the September date was more to provide a evidence of an urgency to it, but I'm certainly not wed to September. I do want to be careful not to make it a blank check, which means it can happen at any time in the next 5 years. That's probably not something that we want. In terms of adding the next resolve, I think to address Freddie's question, because I'm not sure it addresses it, there's going to be a difference between new purchases and things that exist. So we want to be clear that if it exists already, is it something that's permissible to use or not? And I'm not sure that whereas that you added addresses current products that contain that logo. And then in terms of who makes the decision, I actually struggled with this and tried to do some research to find out how those decisions were made. And I couldn't find any evidence that it was a board decision, although it was generally signed off on by boards of education. I think it's important to get community input with the various stakeholders involved, but ultimately somebody has to make a decision. And since we are responsible for that in some way, I think the board in collaboration with the superintendent is where the buck stops. And I think ultimately that's where the decision needs to be made, with us and the superintendent taking into account the opinions of the various stakeholders.
And I think that the stakeholders then and the committee should also look at going forward, what will the new logo look like if we're not putting this through like our full strategic plan idea, but does it make sense for the students themselves to do some sort of contest, or how do you get the information? How do you, the buy-in in my mind helps if the students in particular are involved in the process of creating the new logo.
We actually started this conversation, I want to say started it again because we've had it several times, but shortly after Mr. Librera got here with our diversity club students, and we started talking about how to go about having this conversation around changing the logo and garnering community support for it so it didn't end up being a divisive issue. So we did start having these conversations, and then school closed. So that kind of interrupted it. And if it makes everyone feel more comfortable with adjusting that timeline, I do appreciate, and I would, certainly feel more comfortable if we didn't have that September deadline for a recommendation. However, I can assure you that we will begin the work and the committee will have met by then, so that there will be follow-up discussion and information to share. Whether we're ready to have a recommendation on what to do by then, I don't know, because I think there are going to be a lot of things that come up in the discussion, but I can assure you that if this is the will of the board, that I will make sure that happens prior to that September board meeting, so that we get this work started and these conversations started with the committee. Dr. Shabilsky, do you intend, I'm not sure if you didn't put your hand down or you have it up.
I put it back up again. Might I suggest the following, that the September meeting is where a progress report is requested as opposed to a recommendation. And that just keeps it on the front burner and gives several months to let us know where we stand, and then perhaps we can give additional input at that point.
Sounds good. I'm comfortable with that.
You just use
Mr. Fallon.
Thanks, Bob.
And Mr. Fallon has his hand raised as well. Actually, can I just ask before Peter speaks, is this something we're looking to approve tonight? Because if so, I'm going to ask Peter to maybe email me what he typed up, and I'll try and adjust it a little bit based on what we just talked about.
Well, is somebody planning on making a motion to add it tonight, Greg? I think you can.
I'm willing to do so. I would prefer that not be done until the public has an opportunity to comment, since this wasn't on the agenda.
Yeah.
I think it would be appropriate if anybody wanted to speak to it, that we would hear that, so that we can take that into consideration. But I would prefer to move this tonight.
So we can wait till later. I'll just at least start working on editing it a little bit, so we actually have a version with some of the feedback, and I can also share my screen later so everyone can take a look at it, but that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, you guys have more comments?
Liz, I will email that to you. I changed it a little bit on the fly.
Okay.
To read, be it further resolved that the school district shall not purchase or approve of booster groups purchasing uniforms, clothing, signs, etc., using the warrior head icon, pending any action that may be taken by the board upon receipt of the recommendations of the committee.
Good.
But I will send that to you in a few moments.
Perfect. And I think
while you're wordsmithing, Peter, do you mind changing the September date?
That's what good.
To a progress report?
Yeah, how about, Greg, if I say as soon as possible with a progress report at the first September meeting?
Excellent, thank you.
And I think those were the only, and you can add, I think everyone was in agreement. I know that the list is not limiting or exhaustive of who should be on that committee, but if you want to add board member, I think everyone was in agreement with that, to put that on there.
Agreed.
Can you send me an editable version of it, please?
Yes, I will do that right now, Peter. Thank you, because then I can keep paying attention to calling on people in the meeting too.
Bob, that means I'm going to ask you to make all the motions tonight.
I will send this. Actually, I'm just going to forward you Greg's initial email to me with it as an attachment, and you can just edit that. Yep, perfect. And I believe, Mr. Morrison, did you have your hand raised?
I did. Just, I guess for the resolution, are we limiting it to the warrior head icon, or is it that and other related symbols?
I think, I know that Dr. Shabilsky put in here the
Arrowhead.
Newspaper name, the yearbook name. And I think anything else that we find, includes this.
And then my other, so I just want to make sure that we weren't limiting it, in the resolution A, and then B, just from a point of order standpoint, Can we come back and take action on the resolution after second opportunity for public comment? And this is just for my own.
Meaning, is that permissible? Yeah, Tim.
Tim,
can
in
you-
other business, can you do it?
I think you guys can do it pretty much. Yeah, yeah. I don't see why not. I mean, I think that's a fair thing to do.
Yeah, I guess think about it. We've
That's
gone
fine.
back into closed session at the end of the meeting and come back out if we've had to take action on something.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I
Yep.
think that's fine.
It's
Right, and it
permissible-
started on the agenda earlier on anyway. So
It's permissible until we adjourn.
that's correct.
Got it.
perfect.
Thank you.
Great.
Go.
Okay, so are we ready to move into action items?
I think so.
Madam President, I would like to move items A1 through A3.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Any questions or comments, A1 through A3? Hearing none, roll call, please, Mr. Stice.
Dr. Chand,
Yes.
Mr. Fallon,
Yes.
Mr. Hayek,
Yes.
Mr. Hunsinger?
Yeah.
Mr. Morrison?
Yes.
Mrs. Ober?
Yes.
Ms. Potter?
Yes.
Dr. Shabilsky?
Yes.
Ms. Raban?
Yes.
And Ms. Barone?
Yes.
Motion's carried.
Madam President, I'd like to move items A4 through A5.
Second.
Any questions or comments, A4 through A5? Mr. Stice, roll call, please.
Dr. Chand?
Yes.
Mr. Fallon?
Yes.
Mr. Hayek?
Yes.
Mr. Hunsinger? Where's Barry?
Oh, there he is.
Can't get he's having to get time.
Barry, can you hear us?
Now you just put your thumb up if it's a yes or a thumb down. Barry? Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Mr. Morrison?
Yes.
Mrs. Ober?
Yes.
Dr. Shabilsky?
Yes.
Ms. Raban?
Yes.
And Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Motion's carried.
Madam President, I'd like to move items C1 through C8.
Any questions or comments? Why'd you only go to C8?
I'm sorry, 18. My
Oh.
fault.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
Did we get a second on that one? I didn't hear that.
Oh, yeah, no.
I didn't either.
Yeah, that was
Second.
second.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, any questions or comments? All right, roll call, please.
Dr. Chand?
Yes.
Mr. Fallon?
Yes.
Mr. Hayek?
Yes.
Mr. Hunsinger?
Yes.
Mr. Morrison?
Yes.
Mrs. Ober?
Yes.
Ms. Potter?
Yes.
Dr. Shabilsky?
Yes.
Ms. Raban?
Yes.
And Ms. Barone?
Yes.
Motion's carried.
Madam President, I'd like to move items D1 through D13.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Okay, roll call, please.
Dr. Chand?
Yes.
Mr. Fallon?
Yes.
Mr. Hayek?
Yes.
Mr. Hunsinger?
Yeah, abstain on the bill for CMF and yes on the rest.
Okay, Mr. Morrison?
Yes.
Mrs. Ober?
Yes.
Ms. Potter?
Yes.
Dr. Shabilsky?
Yes.
Ms. Raban?
Yes.
And Ms. Barone?
Yes.
Motion's carried.
All right, nobody said it, but we should thank Terry McConnell for his donation to the scholarship, which is D12. Usually we hit that. It's getting late. So we have the second opportunity for public comment. Again, if you have a comment, please state your name and where you're from, the town you're from, and use your raise your hand function, and we can recognize you.
I see Miss Shabilsky has her hand raised. So if you can please, you can state your name for the board and share your comments.
Hello, my name is Brigitte Shabilsky from Warren, and I support the resolution. I graduated from WHRHS in 2018 and created a petition in 2017 to change the school mascot, where I gained about the school population in signatures, but was disappointed that I never went anywhere during that time. I'm still passionate and feel strongly about changing the mascot and putting in place education about Native American history, and specifically about the Lenape, which our mascot is supposed to represent, and the land where our school is being the land that the Lenape used to inhabit before being displaced. On the Lenape tribe's website, it specifically states that these mascots are an insult and always reinforce insensitivity and stereotypes and are turned into marketing tools. Additionally, in 2017, I also emailed the Confederation of the Nanticoke Lenape Tribes, who have an intertribal union, asking their thoughts on Native American mascots, in which they responded to me with a statement of concern regarding American Indian mascots and derogatory team names. I'm going to state a few of the main points of this statement. So it starts with saying that we hope this statement from the original people of the region may serve to provide a perspective from those most affected by the use of such team names and team mascots. We hope this will help to educate the decision makers on the painful history of American Indian mascots, derogatory team names, and the stereotypes and psychological harm that they perpetuate. So they say that Native American mascots degrade into caricature and marking, that they misinform the public, disrespect sacred items, and belittle our culture, all in the name of honoring us. They also say that this would not be tolerated by the public if it were done to any other race or ethnic group in American society, but it has been an ongoing struggle to awaken the public conscience in regard to it being done to us. They also state that a central mission of an American educational institution should be to teach and promote mutual respect, and schools engaging in actions that degrade any people, such as using mascots that represent Native Americans, are unable to fulfill that mission in a credible way. One of the other main points that they state is that often those who presume to use our images and tribal names do so without our tribal leadership's formal consent, and while relegating our culture to a racist stereotype fixed at some point in the past, as though we no longer exist in our homeland or at all. And then another point that they stress is that they support the statements of the National Congress of American Indians, or the NCAI, who is the nation's oldest and largest and most representative organization of American Indian and Alaskan Native peoples, who are also against Native American mascots. So because both the NCAI and Lenape are against Native American mascots, which our mascot is supposed to represent, we should listen to them and change our mascot. And I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. And I'm actually going to, if you're willing to, would you be able to possibly share that correspondence with me for two reasons? One, I think that's important information to share with the committee. And also, I believe the who you mentioned you contact is who I have for contact information. But if you have a contact on there that I can reach out directly to, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I can send you the email that I received.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. I would appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Anybody else want to comment?
I do not see any other hands raised for public comment.
Okay.
I believe, so Peter did send me the resolution. Do you want me to pull it up and share the screen so we can see what was revised from the original one? Okay, give me a minute to do that. Peter, thank you for taking care of that. Okay. It's up here.
Liz, are you sharing the Google Doc or the email? Because the email has it in red.
That's what I'm going to do is cut and paste the email onto a Word doc because it's in red, which is nice. So
Okay.
that's what I figure I will do, because then everyone can see that. And then we can just clean it up and make it prettier later. Okay. Just make it so folks. Just making it a tad
And
bit easier.
I just forwarded that email to all board members. So if you have access on your computer.
Okay, so now let me go back here and attempt to share. I think I can share a Word doc on here. Here we go. Okay, so can folks see my Word document?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Let me space this out so it's a little bit easier. Okay, so the only parts that changed are the parts down here in red, where Peter changed, reported back to the Watchung Hills Regional High School Board of Education as soon as practical with a progress report by the first scheduled Board of Education meeting in September. Okay, so that sounds right. Nice job, Peter. And then at the end, this is the additional, and be it further resolved that the school district shall not purchase or approve of booster groups purchasing uniforms, clothing, signs, etc., with the warrior head icon and or related symbols, pending any action that may be taken by the board upon receipt of the recommendations of the committee referred to above. I think that looks pretty good.
Greg, do you want to move that?
So I will move this resolution as amended.
I will second it.
Okay. Any questions or comments? I mean, we talked about it a lot. All right. All right, Mr.
Oh,
Stein.
I'm sorry. We do, hold on. We have a hand raised. Sorry, I didn't see it because I was sharing screen. Mr. Morrison?
Okay.
Yeah, just real quick, and I don't want to change the wording on the resolution because it's already done. And but I think just make sure that the intent is to have a board representative on that group.
Oh.
Yeah, no, I think that's clear.
Yeah, I think we understand that.
And if anyone who is interested in being on that wants to send me an email after this meeting, let me know.
Okay.
Great.
Any other questions or comments? All right, Mr. Seiss, roll call on that last resolution.
Jan?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Fallon?
Yes.
Mr. Hayek?
No, I would have approved the original version, but I do not approve it with its amended version. I don't think the board should be taking action until the public has been made aware of this and we heard feedback from everybody.
Mr. Hunsinger?
No.
Mr. Morrison?
Yes.
Mrs. Ober?
Yes.
Ms. Potter?
Yes.
Dr. Shabilsky?
Yes.
Ms. Raban?
Yes.
And Ms. Barone?
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries.
Okay.
So Tim, I will send the revised resolution to you so you have that for the minutes.
Thank you.
I emailed it to Tim too.
Okay, I cleaned it up. It's perfect.
So we're going to go back into exec. I guess I need another motion to go back, right? And then I also have a question about, Liz, you said I will have control. Can that mean I can actually share my screen so I can share the compilation with everybody?
You can actually, you can make it so that participants can share their screen anyway, but I will make you host so that you can end the meeting and control the meeting. As soon as we go into closed, I'll do that. But yes, you can share your screen as well.
And one last technical question to share my screen. Because I don't think I've ever done it.
What,
so
if you
I see this share screen button, right?
Yes.
And then I'm going to go, basically there was an email that Gwen sent me. Do I go into my email? How do I do this?
My recommendation would be to open up the document first. And have because if you remember one meeting I had to go through 6 different screens before I got to what I wanted to share. So open up the email and have that document opened on your screen behind the Zoom.
And I can do that while I'm in Zoom?
Yes. Yep, you can minimize Zoom, yes. And what I'll do, Rita, actually, I'll stay, if you want me to stay on while you're figuring that out, once you go into closed session, and then I can leave, just in case you need any assistance. So I guess if you want to move into closed session, then we'll take care of all of that.
You just don't want to open anything you don't want us to see.
Well, I was just gonna go, like, I'm not exactly sure how to do this, but that's okay. Hopefully I'll figure it out.
You'll figure it out.
Yeah. Okay, so we need a motion to go into closed
So
session.
moved.
Second.
Second. For the purposes of discussing with CSA evaluation, and there will not be action taken tonight after this closed section. So thank you, everybody.